I think the thing is that I'm a boy who should have been born in the 18th century. I always seem to break the gadgets. Do you know, it's an extraordinary thought, isn't it, that between 1968 and 2001, English furniture, traditional English furniture and paintings, to 1910 in date, outgrew bricks and mortar property in the southeast of England by a multiplier of 2. So if you lived in your wardrobe, you were twice as well off as if you'd lived in your home. And then, of course, great change always comes unexpectedly and from a direction that you can't foresee. And so after 9/11, the Americans left the traditional art and antique market. And the market fell initially by 2/3 in 6 weeks. It should be unsurprising, really, because English country house taste, of course, is, especially in the second half of the 20th century, is an American invention. It's the invention, really, of Nancy Lancaster buying out Sybil Colfax and going into partnership with John Fowler. And so rich, eclectic interiors where things are comfortable and layered and speak of a family's interests and passions over generations is a very American romantic interpretation of our taste. She brought us central heating and chairs that were comfortable enough to actually sit in. Good girl. So, of course, if the Americans left the market, it's unsurprising that it should have had a significant wobble. I've always found that rather surprising because, of course, English country house taste is unpretentious. It's forward-looking. It always has one eye on the past as it embraces the future. This is Jim Eade's marvellous interior at Chattels Yard in Cambridge. But you find the same taste closer to home. And here you have a confident Patrick Heron lithograph from his Winchester group above a bronze by the wonderful Estonian artist Dora Gordine. She influenced Anthony Caro and all sorts of modern artists in the modern British tradition. So here it is. We've got brown furniture in collapse, so we don't have to pay attention to our chattels, our personal property, when we're doing our inheritance tax planning. Well, you really couldn't be more wrong because, of course, there are collectors' markets that have boomed in the most extraordinary way. And take jewellery, for example. This is a pendant locket that belonged to the wonderful Dame Vera Lynn that we sold earlier in the year for £26,000 on behalf of her charity. Provenance, of course, is vital to all art and antiques, and never more so with jewellery. So you have not only the artistry and the quality of the gems, but who's owned this? Who has it accompanied? It's rather a marvellous jewel, don't you think? Well, she was rather marvellous, really, too. Watches, of course, are an extraordinary boom market. The way that that has grown over the last 5 years is absolutely breathtaking. This 1963 Omega Speedmaster, because it predates the moon landing, is 3 times more valuable than a later one. We love that sense of objects giving us place in the procession of human history, don't we? How marvellous that this was on the Apollo 11 first moon landing, a watch just like this, and that you could take it home and wear it. It was discovered at a charity fundraising valuation day by me in Horsham, funny enough in the Methodist Hall. And if you're tempted next week, if you're looking for that perfect present, boys and girls, this is going to be about £10,000 to £15,000. Rather joyful, isn't it? And of course, early Rolex. This is one of the early Submariners. Again, that early date, 1963. So the sort that you'd have seen James Bond wearing in Dr. No, but also famously Jacques Cousteau popularised it. It was his favourite sort of diving watch. You remember those wonderful programmes with him on Calypso. We're showing our age, I know. That sold for £10,000. So again, these are inheritance tax problems. And there are also advice that you would need around capital gains. So thank God we've got such a fantastic panel to look after us, otherwise we'd be in proper trouble. Business with the Chinese continues apace. This is a watercolour by George Chinnery, and it's of the European warehouses at Canton. The Chinese in the 19th century, before the Opium Wars, wouldn't allow us to go up into China. We had to order our goods and have them brought to us. Probably very sensible of them, as it happens. But, of course, because of that extraordinary and large trade with China throughout the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, we have an abundance of Chinese objects here in Britain. And the Chinese, of course, after the Cultural Revolution, are seeking to reacquire the objects that tell their story. So take this. This is a Ming Cloisonne enamel hue vase. It was about this tall, and it's got alterations. I think the handles are later. But how wonderful to have something from the 1600s. A hue vase, of course, a wine vessel. So it was a decent party that this vessel was intended for. And if you've got one of these lurking and you think that it might be 19th century, as this particular lady did, and worth £100, you'll be shocked when it realises 19,000. All of these things need to be considered. This was discovered at the top of a staircase in a masonette in Horsham by my Chinese specialist, Tom Rousel. He arrived to find a vase with a 1/4-inch chunk missing out of the rim, and it filled with bulrushes and could barely speak. He immediately recognised it as being Imperial Markham period, the right reign mark for the piece. So not honouring an earlier artist, but that it was made for the Chinese emperor in the imperial palace. And the poems around it describe the 4 seasons of the year. Qin Lung was considered to be one of the greatest artists that's ever inhabited the world. I was invited to go to talk to the Chinese government back in 2013 about ethics and auction practice, as they were trying to embrace a Western way of working. And one of the people that I met doing a talk just like that, he was sat about where you are, sir, in your very handsome check shirt. Anyway, he came to the sale, and he handed me his card. Mr. Toovey, he said through his translator, always two hands, they pass you important pieces of paper. He said, we met in Beijing, and I'm thinking, oh, Lorks, where? He said, I was at such and such a talk. And so he did all his due diligence, and there he sat in the sale, and the bidding on this vase set a world record price. It started at 100,000 and concluded at 520,000. What was rather lovely was when he sent his granddaughter on her way home from school to pick it up with 2 of the biggest chaps you've ever seen in your life. That created a slight capital gains problem. No doubt you helped. Now, this is also interesting. This was discovered down at Middleton. It's 2 sides of a Japanese gold coin, and it's a 10 yen year 3 coin, circa 1870. And I can only tell you that because I have a wonderful coin specialist called Mark Stonnard, who is remarkable in many collectors' fields. His latest treasure that he uncovered was an Egyptian grave marker that he found under a bed, not far from here, and it's just made 28,000, marking a judge 1500 BC. Isn't that lovely? With paintings of his daughters on it. Anyway, this coin was discovered by a colleague of mine doing a routine probate valuation, inheritance tax valuation, and the lady had been previously told that it had the 3 gold coins in the bureau had no value, they were just the weight of gold. Beware. My colleague immediately recognised that it was rare and was allowed to bring it back to Mark Stonnard, who started, really, I've never seen anybody so excited in my whole life. He said, there are only 4, 5, he said now. He knew where the 2 reference ones were, the British Museum and the Japanese National Bank, and he liaised with their curators during COVID to match, to check that where they'd been punched out, that the imperfections matched, that it wasn't just a fake. And the provenance was marvellous. It went back, would you believe, to a mayor of Worcester in the 19th century. So there were only about 12 years missing in its provenance. That gave people confidence that it wasn't just a run-up one. And it made £260,000. And the inheritance tax bill on that was shocking. Poor Daniel's looking shocked. And because they didn't know it was there, you see. It's one of those things that, all of these things, it's so important to take the necessary steps to prepare. And knowledge and understanding what you hold in your financial basket, whether it's investments or bricks and mortar property or art and antiques, is so important, because steps could have been taken to help this family along this way had they known what they had. Even as it was, it transformed a modest lady's retirement, but it could have been so much nicer, couldn't it, team? Oh, this was lovely. This is one of my favourite discoveries of the year. It's a George Romney. It was always thought to be an Angelica Kaufmann. Very rarely can you trace a painting's provenance from the day it was delivered with wet paint. And we know that this was delivered to Langley Park in Norfolk. We know which day it was. We know that they handed over 18 guineas for the painting. And we know when it went off to the framers and when it was returned. And we could see how it went down through the family's line. It's just extraordinary. And this was a lost George Romney. The George Romney specialist in Liverpool, oh, he was so excited. But I thought it was of her sister, not her. And of course it's Lady Letitia Beauchamp Proctor, marvellous name, and a marvellous face, don't you think? This is Tim Williams, who stood beside it, who spends most of his life in the London art libraries discovering things. He's working on several very important portraits as we speak. It should have made 8 to 12,000, but with the remarkable provenance, it was £22,000. Oh, I had to pop these in. These are salt and pepper. Don't you remind you of Winnie the Pooh? There's no other reason that they delight you. And this is Ken Howard. This makes you realise how hot it is at the moment. This is a beach. Modern British pictures in the New English Art Club are on the rise significantly at this moment. This little one is £5,000. And this is a lovely story. This is Banksy's Monkey Queen. I suppose it's all right in a Jubilee year to show you this. As a mad royalist, I'm not quite sure, but the story's lovely. The young lady who owned this print maxed out her credit card in Brighton, at the Art Republic in Brighton during one of their festivals in 2004. She said, I only had 80 quid left on the credit card and that's what I bought. It's not one of the rarest Banksys, but it made £19,000. She was rather thrilled. She'd owned it a long time. That's not quite so bad for capital gains, is it? Poor love. I don't know that she had a portfolio of stocks and shares to offset all of her allowances. What do you reckon of that? Rather dull, really, isn't it? We found it at the back of a potting shed just outside Shipley. And it's a very early and rare Louis Vuitton trunk. He was the most extraordinary man, Louis Vuitton, you know. He took him 3 years to walk from where he was born on the Swiss-French border to Paris. He worked his way to Paris, where he trained to be a packer. And then he bought this extraordinary international firm. It wasn't until much later that the Louis Vuitton monogram that we all know and love came to be. You could tell because of the paper label inside it. We set the second of 2 world records with this at £30,500. But it's the sort of trunk that could have just been turned out. Would you have bothered? No. I'm so glad we opened the lid. Always worth checking. This is a joyful little story. Do you like him? I've always wanted a tortoise, and my wife says I'm not allowed. Do any of you have tortoises? No. It's a tortoise that was about this long, and it was by the famous Martin brothers, Victorian art potters in the late 19th century. And the lady, this came from a house at Cranley. The lady had dug it out of the garden when she arrived and had had to glue it back together. It was in 7 pieces with Yoo-hoo. Good stuff, Yoo-hoo. You can soak it off. It's much easier for a restorer than super glue. And her family gave her hell for all of the 30 years that ensued because of this blooming ugly tortoise. Well, they dropped coal on it and they mistreated the poor tortoise horribly until I arrived. And we sold it for them for £17,000. Mummy would have been laughing from heaven, I tell you. And they raised a glass to her, quite right too. But who would have thought that you would need tax planning for a broken pottery tortoise? Thank God for you, lovely lot. And if you've got this as part of your estate, well, you really should be thinking about how you hand it on. And if you don't know you've got it, you can't do the planning, can you? So valuations in preparation, gathering that information is really important. This is Rembert Doden's, it's Kruidebeck. It's a book about plants. And it's broken down into a series of different parts where it talks about their medicinal properties. It was the most published book in English, except for the Bible, in the late 16th century. So it's late Tudor. Isn't that fantastic? Late Tudor book. And you know, we carried on using the wisdom in this book until the 18th century. My daughter's just qualified in medicine. I told her about the book. I got one of those looks. But it's a fantastic thing. And it made £5,500. But for such a historic document, that seems quite good value, really, doesn't it? I love this scene. This is by Dame Laura Knight. One of the great areas of explosion is going to be women artists. Thank God. With more and more professional women in the world, there is a rising demand, unsurprisingly, for women artists who are being reassessed extraordinarily. And look at the sensitivity of this poor girl exhausted from the stage and collapsing in her wicker chair. Laura Knight, of course, inspired a whole generation, several generations of British artists from the early 20th century onwards. And prints, of course, are one of those great value areas. So you can buy a Laura Knight like this for £1,100–1,200 at auction. Now, I'd called my talk, didn't I, Investing in Art and Antiques, and hopefully I've given you some things to set you thinking about your home and whether actually there are things there that you should be considering finding out about in order that you can ask the advice of these wonderful people here. But I told you about the new minimalists, and you're thinking there's nothing minimal about all this stuff and cabinets full of treasures and dining tables laid with sparkly glasses. What on earth is minimalist about that, Rupert? Well, the truth is, it's the young. If you come to my sale room on a Saturday morning for a view, you'll find you'll be mown down by babies in buggies and young people buying proper furniture and adoring it and wanting sparkly glasses for their dining table. It's such an exciting thing. The market always used to be 3-generational. Everybody wanted what Granny had, and it's beginning to revive again. And the most delicious thing is that these young people are calling themselves the new minimalists. It's utterly ridiculous. I've never seen a generation buy so many lovely things. There's nothing minimal at all. But they say that they're treading minimally on the world and her resources. That their collecting makes no demand on this beautiful planet. Well, we all knew it when we started collecting too, didn't we? But they're so eloquent and pickly with their sense of humour. They're rather a hopeful lot. Of course, the truth of all these things is that you can't discover them without asking advice. So always feel free to ask. And the most important thing, of course, and something which I aspire to with my own professional practice, and which I know is at the heart of Creston Reeves, is that quality of the relational. Unless you understand somebody in a 360-degree way, you can't possibly advise with any subtlety or intelligence or professionalism. And there's so much production line stuff going on in the professions today that it is incredible when you look at Creston Reeves, how they embrace that quality of really understanding people and having the professionalism to advise them to arrive where they want to be. You are amazing, actually. Sorry to embarrass you, but it's true. And together we embrace that by supporting our community with the Shipley Arts Festival in all sorts of different ways. We believe passionately in community and relationship and professionalism. Anyway, a canter into your cupboards and the art world. Thank you.